Okay, this is the Infinite Imaginarium show. And any people just tuning in, I just want to welcome you all. And because we've got a great show for you tonight. And also, I'd like to introduce my partner in crime, Satori D. He is, I have to say, one of life's true gems. He's an amazing artist, and I think he is deserving of two titles: digital shaman and digital genius. So welcome, Satori. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. We're always it's always interesting setting. Well, when you set up the room, I don't know how you get into your digital mischief, but it always seems to happen. But
Always.
I'm
Not
glad we
quite sure
finally
how
got
that
it all
works.
sorted out, though.
Exactly. Okay. Anyway, I'm really excited because, you know, amidst all the drama that happened earlier, I'm excited about today's show because it gives me immense pleasure to introduce a great man and also a really old friend of mine who I don't think we've spoken since like the early 90s or the mid 90s.
Those
We
glorious
chat on
days.
Facebook a bit, don't we?
We do, definitely.
Now, I think you could be aptly described as a performance artist,
Yeah, that
philosopher,
sounds good.
an actor,
At my best.
a writer and a director as well, and also a brilliant musician, which I'm testament to. I've done a little bit with you in that respect. So
Yeah,
I would say you're a man of many talents.
right, thank you.
So I'd like to welcome Matt Fellows to the show.
Thank you very
How are
much.
you, Matt?
I'm very well, thank you. And it's a great
Brilliant.
honour.
Is that coffee you're drinking there, or is there a little shot of whiskey in there?
No, it's coffee. Whiskey would make me fire too.
That's a bit boring,
Absolutely. It's stimulants all the way.
but it'll keep you focused.
Definitely.
Now,
Trust.
recently I had the pleasure of viewing a quite a moving clip, something that you showed me, sort of a short film clip called "The Unknown Soldier Laments," and I believe that's from a play that you wrote called "The Return to Sovereignty." Could
Yeah,
you sort of tell me a little bit more about that? Because I feel that the title itself kind of speaks volumes. An awesome title.
definitely. I mean, it started as the actual piece just came through one night. I mean, it was quite amazing, but it's something I've wrestled with all my life. What we take for granted as normal in the society that we're brought up with, but we're completely unaware that we're sort of molded and sculpted through our experiences of this massive amount of post-traumatic stress that's being passed down from generation to generation, from the Second World War, the First World War, particularly, and the level of carnage that took place in the First World War, it was beyond reckoning. And so what it is to be a man and relationships between men and women have been sculpted through that. And that a large part of the problems, should we say, from the male side have been shut down, anger, blame, rage, unexplainedness, violence, an awful lot of that we see in our society, and the knock-on effects of drug abuse and alcoholism and or other sort of self-hating, shall we say, behavior that we all seem to indulge in and feel as normal comes from that. And it was really important to remember our ancestors because all our family members went through that. And it helps in a way of understanding our parents because of their parents and what was handed down from them, and sort of understanding of the people who came before us in so far as that they were human beings and what they went through. And that helps us to make sense of who we are and our identity and how we feel, because we've been past, hopefully it filters down the further away you get from the actual wars. But so that piece particularly sort of reflects that, and a feeling to connect. In Glastonbury, everyone's always talking about connecting with their ancestors, which is fine. We've got no problem with that. But it always seems to be connecting with our ancestors 3,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago. But it seems to me to make sense to try and connect with our ancestors that are either alive now or recently deceased because they're the people closest to us in our experiences and the experiences that we've sort of inherited from our parents and our upbringings, which, you know, stay with us and sculpt our view of life. It's yeah, it was a piece of that. It's empathy, I guess, for our ancestors and what they went through. I think that's
Yeah, and I think that it's an important thing that we have to kind of look at some point, that it is true that these kind of behaviors and patterns do quite often appear in families, don't they? It seems to me that it's a bit of more than just a coincidence that these repeated behaviors or patterns, which can be sometimes good or bad, or, you know, perceived as good or bad, it could be that there's always wealth in a family, and even like future generations that don't necessarily inherit any wealth, they seem to amass a fortune irrespective of whether they've inherited the, you know, or you know, conversely, in a really negative sense, it can be that there's these patterns of abuse, generational abuse, that occur.
very much
Is that kind of the thing that you're sort of talking about here, Matt?
definitely. I mean, when the men came back from what they experienced, they were completely unable to process it. My great uncle, I remember talking to him. He was 102 when he died, and I remember I was about 14, and I was talking to him. He was in Butley Hospital where I was born, and we were talking, and he came. All he would say about the First World War was that he came home and he just couldn't be there. He volunteered to go to Russia, not because he wanted to fight or kill people or anything like that. He just volunteered for somewhere as far away from home as he could possibly be because he couldn't be there after what he'd experienced. You know, the person he was that went away to that war, it was gone, and it was replaced by just how do you share? How, you know, and so what happened was men came back. They were initially completely, if they weren't showing obvious signs of post-traumatic stress, they were totally shut down, completely shut down. I think that you know, even sort of in comedy sort of things, you see the man with his shed, and, you know, and unable to communicate, completely unable to communicate with women at all. Add in alcohol, then all of that just horror that they went through, which is unimaginable. You think about the post-traumatic stress you get from a car accident, or, you know, being assaulted, God forbid any of those things happen. There's genuine post-traumatic stress disorder is genuine. I think it's it's the main. I think you were going to have mental health labels. I think it's probably the main one, really, that pretty much all mental health issues is some form of post-traumatic stress disorder, and a lot of it is cultural, passed down. Because if our parents have been handed that by their parents, you grow up. I mean, if you grow up at the end of World War II, I mean, the level of fear that, you know, yes, the elation of surviving, but the fear, because that could happen. I mean, you know, I grew up in the Cold War, and, you know, I remember the fear of that. That was bad enough. Sort of
The
lying
fear mongering of sort of, you know, nuclear war
annihilation.
looming. We've all kind of we kind of all grew up in that environment, didn't we? And,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, the whole of this, you know, the way the world is all about kind of fear mongering, isn't it? But going back to what we were saying about this generational thing, I mean, you know, my dad, his father was 56 when he was born, and he'd been in both world wars, and he died when my dad was 6, which had a massive impact on my dad's life and his mother, who she suffered from mental health problems, and subsequently after the death of my grandfather, she couldn't cope. So that had a massive impact on my father's life, and that in itself is kind of like a good example of how these things impact.
Yeah, yeah.
He was in a very poor state of health because of the fact, I think he was shot 11 times over the period of the First World War and the Second World War combined. He was a heavy smoker, and God knows what was going through his mind, the sort of the post-traumatic stress that we were talking about. And it's like, one thing that I wanted to ask you, Matt, is how do you think, what would be the best way to somehow break these cycles, these patterns that can be negative and generational? And I I even believe, and not everybody believes this, that depending on the state of mind of the mother, that kind of goes directly into the baby when the baby's actually growing in the womb. I think that it starts there, personally, but not everybody agrees with that.
I mean, I think it definitely starts there, but because, you know, I mean, and certainly young childhood, definitely. A good friend of mine, classic example of this, a friend of mine, he's 56, and he's always had a really strong fear of propeller planes, and he still gets it. He still gets it now. Whenever he hears a propeller plane, it's literally his knuckles tighten, and he has this feeling of fear. And he couldn't explain it, and it's quite interesting because he's wonderful and northern and not really into the hippie thing, but he started to wonder whether it was like a past life or something, because he says it was so strong a feeling. And then after, it was a couple of years after his mum died, and he went to a family party, and his auntie quite spontaneously told him that his mother had been machine gunned by a Messerschmitt. A Messerschmitt had actually come down and tried to shoot her, and she'd had to duck and hide, and so that she had a mortal fear of, quite rightly, of propeller planes. And then obviously he was in the womb, she had a mortal fear of propeller planes, and every time she heard one, she would obviously tense, and then all through his early childhood tense, and even at the age of 56, he realized that was what it was from. So those early years are massive. It's almost used it's a metaphor. The human body isn't a biological computer, but we can use it as a metaphor. You know, the idea that if these experiences, these early experiences, they're sort of in our DOS, you know, and in the way buried down. You can't access it or even understand it on the desktop that is what we identify with as our personality. And culturally, it's really there. I think that's most of the problems we have with drug abuse and violence and rage and relationship dysfunction. A large part of it is that, because it's handed down. You know, the men came back from the First World War. They can communicate with women and children. The boys grew up seeing their fathers as distant and unable to communicate. And then if they drank, extremely violent, very scary, probably nightmares, screaming. So there's this whole disassociation with the male part on males. And then you go through the depression where everyone's out of work. So there's like a even more sort of demolishing of any sort of sense of self. And then you have another war, Second World War, you know, and it gets passed down and down and down. So that piece is definitely inspired by that, and the whole play is in true Glastonbury sort of fashion. It's like an archetypal representation of sort of where we're at culturally in this country at the very least, and what needs to happen. I mean, the problem is, I mean, you see that there are certain attempts, I would say, to manipulate us into, you know, some form of conflict with Russia at the moment. And, you know, or Iran, or the potential for wars to break out now are quite high. And it's sort of being vigilant that we don't allow ourselves to be conned into a situation like that, because, you know, the fear would be that, you know, you lose another generation on the equivalent of the fields of Flanders.
It kind of begs the question, doesn't it, that the whole world that we live in is kind of like a big con. It's like, you know, everything that you've talked about, Matt, which I totally resonate with and I totally agree with. On top of that, you've got all what I would refer to as the programming, you know, the programming of society, you know, in the form of like that, this divisive environment that we're kind of, that is kind of thrust upon us from a very young age, that we have this identity that we are something or another. You know, it's like you have this religion or that religion, you go to this school, you're in this class system or you're not in that. you know, even with football at the moment, football is such a classic example of that divisive. Football's a bit of a strange thing because it's kind of, there's an element of football that brings everybody together, but at the same time, it's very tribal and very divisive. Just like religion, football to me is just like another religion where everybody has their own team and like the other teams are garbage, you know, like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
you know what I mean?
Definitely. I mean, there's a certain element of bread and circuses to it. Like, I forget, the Roman emperor basically said the elements that you need to control the masses are bread and circuses. So you got to keep the food in the supermarkets, and you got to give them big sort of flashy events to stir them up. You know, get their tribal allegiances up and their blood up, and you know, and distract people. Obviously, I mean, I could be guilty of it as well, but the thing that identifying with a group of sportsmen so much that it affects your happiness. I mean, they say was wife beating goes up when England lose.
But what made me laugh, you said about wife beating happening was more prevalent when they lose. But the hilarity is that if, you know, the other day, the Colombia game that we won, we broke this whole kind of curse of the penalties. And we won on penalties, which is just kind of unheard of with England.
Yeah.
There were more fights. There were more drunken fights. The hilarity was it was between the English with other English people because they got so drunk celebrating that they had fights anyway. And I'm thinking, what's going to happen if we win the World Cup? Is it just going to be like complete carnage because people are just going to go on a drinking spree for about 3 months non-stop?
I mean, what would we do if we won? We don't know. We're not winners. We like a good heroic defeat. That's why we celebrate Dunkirk over and over again. We love that we're English. We want to be knocked out heroically in a slightly unfair manner in the quarterfinals. You know, that fits us fine. If we go and win it, hey, mental health issues. You've not seen anything yet. You know, good Lord. And then we got to try and win it again. I mean, this is the sort of thing that, you know, broke Alf Ramsey. I'd say step away. Enjoy kicking a ball around the field, but
it is the most hilarious. Like, I have to be honest, right? I've often had this conversation. My dad was a semi-professional footballer, and what's really funny about this is that when we were growing up at Christmas time, our stockings were football socks. He played for Bristol Rovers, and he was really obsessed. And like, we couldn't, if there was a football match on, we couldn't walk into the lounge and make any noise. It had to be completely silent. And then if his team lost, which was, you know, he supported Manchester United, then he'd be depressed for weeks on end. He couldn't handle it. And I mean, but it's the same thing. It's this whole indoctrination of culture, the same as religion, the same as the class system. And at some point, there has to be a collective that break that cycle, and I think that's what will be instrumental in breaking the generational repetitive characteristics of people and scenarios that seem to arise out of nowhere, that people just say, well, that's my situation, that's my lot, that's what happens, you know, this is what, and people just sort of accept it. And I do wonder if maybe that at some point it takes somebody within that family unit, within one of the generations, to do something different, to step out of their comfort zone, which breaks that cycle.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people do it, you know, broken away from their family situation and gone to the other side of the world, gone and got lost in the outback, hung out with Aboriginal shaman, you know, and have come back. But the thing is like, you can, the easy thing, not easy thing, it's easier to make a change in your adult personality, but it's the stuff that's been programmed deep even before we were aware of ourselves as separate. You know, in those first 2 years, our sense of separate from our parents is a lot less than it is, a lot more than it is now. You know, we feel more joined to them, and a lot of the programming goes in there. But I mean, humans, we're incredibly adaptable. You know, we can live anywhere pretty much, it seems. And if a species can work it out, I'm pretty sure it's us. And I mean, it sounds like a hippie dream, but how I mean, a big start of it is sort of building up self-esteem in children. I think, you know, basically, because kids are the future, right? So somehow, I mean, there has to be a change of what's the word? Intent, should we say, in the way societies run. At the moment, I think a friend of mine pointed out that, you know, people are depressed and they feel depressed, but they are partly oppressed. You know, they are being oppressed and kept in a sense of stress. I mean, you only have to look at the media. I mean, you turn on the TV. I mean, I don't have one. I haven't had one since 2000. But where I work, they have a big TV, and I'm a support worker, and service users like to watch television, and so I end up now watching quite a lot of television. And you know, I mean, it's horrendous what passes for mainstream entertainment. And I'm not just saying from not like a snobby intellectual point of view, but it really is like violent serial killers, more serial killers, secrets of Hitler, Hitler's secrets. I mean, if he's got any more secrets, I mean, good Lord, you know, and I get, you know, I mean, really?
It's a strange world, a strange, mad world that we live in. And it's, yeah, like you say, what passes for entertainment is quite disturbing. And I just wonder if there is this kind of, there's this other thing that I hear this a lot in the kind of the new age circles, and I don't really, you know, if I'm completely honest, I classify the new age as potentially another dangerous hole that we could fall down, another religion, and something that could be used against
and you could humanity. Right, I mean, you know, head conjunct Uranus, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to the new age, you know, that's the only astrological sign thing.
It's garbage, isn't it, really?
I mean, well, they've taken stuff like from India and different cultures, amalgamated it together, and anyone, and you know, and then tried to sell you it, really. I mean, what sums it up for me is you got angel healing, TM, right, trademarked. And I'm like, okay, so let's
activate your DNA for £8,000. We can activate your DNA and make you a superhuman for a huge amounts of money.
Yeah, and it's like, if there's such a thing as angels, let's just say for argument's sake there is, right? And they've given you this healing power. Why would they ask you to trademark it? Does Archangel Michael need his, 20%? Otherwise, going to Sodom and Gomorrah you? I mean,
yeah, that's the biggest franchise of all. You know, he came down to marry so he could get that sweet gold.
yeah. And, for the whole of creation, so that's probably who we're paying tax to. Yeah, I'd say avoid the new age kids. It'll just lead you down to dark ghettos in the cul-de-sacs of your mind. I mean, I live in well, no, that's a lie, actually. I actually lived in Glastonbury for 6 years. I oscillate around Glastonbury because I grew up here. But, I mean, dressing up and having a bit of a pageant is fine, and getting people together, that's fine, but don't take it seriously. I mean, Glastonbury is a place where people come seeking, and it feels, as a sort of local, it feels like we have a bit of a duty, really, to warn these people, genuine people, that a lot of this new age stuff, well, it leads to the occult. Dun, dun, dun. And I don't know about you, but everyone I've met that's ever got into that, it just seems to bend their minds, and they start doing things. It seems like a gateway to self-hatred,
Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, Glastonbury, tends to exploit a lot of the, there's a bit of an exploitation thing going, like, come into this shop and buy this crystal for 8 million quid because it's Glastonbury, and because you're buying it in a Glastonbury shop, we can charge a stupid amount of money for it. So my only, I love Glastonbury on the basis that I grew up there and I went to school there, and it's part of my life, but the exploitation of all this stuff is just not helping the situation at all. It's just,
And the new age thing is recent. It's only 1960s. I mean, you know, they had Dion Fortune or whoever it is. It sounds like a transformer to me, but I shouldn't say that. Right? You know, you had that back in, I don't know, the 1920s and 30s. But the new age of sort of taking over Glastonbury and claiming it as its own only really happened since the 1960s. It's not indigenous. It never was. They sort of moved in on it. But, you know, Glastonbury.
How many Merlins are there now in Glastonbury? About 20?
It's so many, you know. We are missing, though. I have to say, we are missing a fake Irishman. So if you know any fake Irishmen, you send them down. The guy from the fake Irishman's guild, he's getting a bit nervous because he's going to have to don the fake Irish outfit and go out. You know, I mean, you must remember back in the 90s, we had at least 3 fake Irishmen per 100 people, didn't we? There's like one guy was Austrian, there's another Polish guy. They weren't, but they don't talk in the Irish accents, you know, because I guess the ladies liked it more. Sing Irish folk songs. But Bulgarian. But never mind. It's Glastonbury. Reinvent yourself.
So, you know, I think we all agree that the new age is kind of, and I just want to say to people that are listening that, you know, people that might be on that kind of journey of opening their mind, I'm not saying that all the elements of the new age sort of school of thought is wrong. I'm just saying that it's a slippery slope if you become completely obsessed. For example, you know, if people do horrendous wrong things to you, and somebody in a new age school of thought says, "Oh no, you just need to sit on a hill and meditate. Don't be angry. Don't let the anger get the better of you." I would say that could be a slippery slope, because I think it's actually healthy and positive in certain situations to express anger and to not allow people to walk all over you. For example, you know, the new age may say that that's not a good thing to do, and I have to say I would disagree with that, but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, because if you don't take up the idea that what you just said, you'll end up cleaning someone's toilets for 5 years to become a high priestess or a high priest or grand mages, you know, because there is an awful lot of that. You can basically become a shaman in 3 easy workshops if you can afford 1,500 quid. But if you can, you have to clean the toilets for 5 years, and then you'll get your certificate. You know, I think, you know, come to Glastonbury, spend a lot of the time on the hills, pay the town lip service. Don't spend too much time in the town because it'll just do your head in. But go up on the hills and around the countryside, surrounding countryside, and you know there is a wonderful magic there. It's when the mist rolls in. You're up the Tor when the mist rolls in on a full moon. You don't need someone to explain it to you. You don't need to do a ritual or invoke, I don't know, Aleister Crowley's tiny toenail or whatever it is that people do.
Talking of Glastonbury, there is one thing that, you know, is a bit of a controversial subject, but it's something that I'm quite
What's this?
Pro, and that is the use of psychedelics and the potential for them opening certain areas of the brain.
Yeah.
So you have more of an awareness of your actual reality, as opposed to succumbing to the programming, you know, that we are kind of subjected to from a very young age through the institutions, etc. I was just wondering what you thought about that, Matt. You know, the whole thing about psychedelics and how that can be beneficial. I'm not saying that, you know, go out and do loads of drugs.
I mean,
my view is anything that you abuse will kind of abuse you. It's kind of to do with, you know, the law of physics, quantum physics. If you abuse something, it's kind of the like attracts like thing. It will abuse you. So I don't agree with that, but I do personally believe that psychedelics can be a positive thing. And I think quite often in the media and stuff, they've really demonized it, a bit like Russia, demonized it to within an inch of its life, because they want people to stay away from it, because they kind of know, the elites know that if people go down that road, it's going to kind of wake elements of the brain up, awareness that they don't want people to have. I was just wondering what you thought, you know, while we're on the subject of Glastonbury and the new age and stuff, what you thought about all of that.
Well, certainly, I mean, the first thing I'd say about psychedelics is scene and setting, very important if you're ever thinking about ingesting them. But from that, I mean, one thing, human beings are biologically programmed to alter their consciousness. The three things that cause the brain to release the reward chemicals, three things do it. One of them is when we eat, another time is when we procreate, and the third time is when we alter our consciousness. So as human beings, we are designed to do that, and we have an inbuilt biological desire, as strong as sex and food, to alter our consciousness. I mean, this is why I always used to wonder as a kid why people start. Why would you sniff lighter fuel? What's that all about? Why would people do that? But what I learned to realize is that people have an inbuilt desire to alter the consciousness, hence the caffeine, the cigarettes, tobacco, the beer, the sugar. I mean, we're always altering our consciousness. We have an inbuilt desire, but because of the society we've grown up in, we've been separated from the natural ones. But I mean, what they found with that LSD was that it's really bizarre that before it was banned, it was seen as the Holy Grail. I mean, the chap who invented the 12-step program, he actually said it was the Holy Grail. It was the only thing that could get people through the 4th step. The first 3 steps of the 12-step program is about basically realizing you've got a problem, working on ways to develop, how to put a stop to it in the short term, and then work on coping strategies on how to keep it going. And then you get to the 4th stage is when you have to go and have a look at what it is that's triggering the behavior. So in the case of an alcoholic, what is it? What is it that's making you drink? What are you trying to block out? What are you trying to anesthetize yourself from? These feelings that you have because of things that happen. And without LSD, people would get into the 4th step and go and just totally relapsing, because if you could, it's an impossible task to ask someone who's becoming an alcoholic, drinking to block out the pain of what's happened, to ask them to just go into the pain and face that. It's impossible. If they could do that, they wouldn't be drinking in the first place. What he was finding was using LSD in a controlled environment as part of a therapy. It wasn't just dosing them up and letting them go mental, and it was an ongoing thing. He found that he could get people through that 4th step, and once you get past that 4th step, the other 9 steps are relatively easy. And they were finding it. I mean, it sort of like you get two minds with the whole Timothy Leary thing, where what it led to. Before they banned it, it would, psychedelic drugs were having an incredible effect. And I mean, I think it's scene and setting. What Leary and Robert Anton Wilson talk about imprinting. It would seem from, I mean, the information was banned. When they actually banned it, they pretty much burnt all the books. So psychology students that were starting in the 70s, that when they started, there was nothing about the research of psychedelics in therapy and the massive success stories. It was completely literally like they did the Library of Alexandria. They just burnt it. And so the new students coming through didn't know anything about it. It was only when the internet was invented and people started uploading information, and you realize that actually before they banned it, it was incredible. And what they talk about LSD is, it's what leads me on to psychedelics, is basically LSD is only active in your system for 14 minutes. So it's only active, the actual drug, in your system if you've taken it, for 14 minutes. In those 14 minutes, you will feel no different whatsoever. But what it's doing in those 14 minutes is it's binding with these receptor sites in your brain. It's turning certain receptor sites on and turning certain receptor sites off, and radically altering the chemicals, the information from our nervous system that's coming through to our conscious mind. So when that happens, your perception of reality radically changes, because you're getting different information from your nervous system into our brains. And what we realize is that basically our nervous system is this incredible thing, and what's it? They said they estimate our brain takes 1.8 trillion hits of information every second from our nervous system to our brain, and our brain processes about 5,000 of those, and we call that everything. and that's one explanation on why the 90% of the universe, whatever it is dark matter. We only use 10% of our brain. It's basically we are what we think is normal reality is a heavily filtered version of a truer reality that is coming from our nervous systems.
I agree with that, and my own experience of taking LSD is that I remember one occasion taking quite a strong. It was like a microdot, and I remember looking. The whole trip was quite mad, but I remember we got back to somebody's house, and I was looking at the coffee table of this within this person's lounge, and it was moving about constantly.
Yeah.
At the time, I didn't really know what it was, but years down the line, as I did a bit of research and I got to understand it a bit more, the conclusion I came to was that my vibration had sped up. So this whole thing about everything being comprised of atoms, and obviously due to our vibrational kind of hum on a normal day-to-day basis, is that everything will appear solid. But obviously with LSD, it changes the whole vibration of your body to the point that everything will then become not solid anymore. Hence the movement of this table, which it was like 20 years down the line that I realised this. At the time, I just thought it was really cool that this table was moving around. But Dan, I was wondering, do you have a general view on LSD? What do you think is a beneficial thing for people in general? Or do you think there's certain people in society that perhaps would not benefit from it, from experiencing something like that?
I think it's really interesting what's happening right now with kind of like the psychedelic renaissance that's happening. I went to this conference a couple months ago, and they were talking about this different studies that are actually happening right now. And what Matt was kind of saying, it's like this relearning of everything that kind of got stopped in like the 60s after they like made it illegal. And the one of the most interesting ones that I was someone was talking about was with actually ecstasy, MDMA, and how that was really helping people with the therapy sessions. And it's something like crazy how much this is just preliminary studies, and they will of course like to do some more studies with it, but the effective rate of it is something insane. Like 70% people are saying, you know, they finding really benefit from it. And like things that they don't really tell you is like what therapy sessions without it, or even, you know, with the different pills that they have now, like the mental health state of like psychiatry is like really bad. Like like their success rate is horrible. It's like 5%, and like then you're like numb by you taking these pills which don't even actually like help you like process whatever you need to process. And like, yeah, and it like even the pills like make it worse in a lot of cases. So I think exactly what we were talking about in the beginning is we like there's the individual portion of what the individual has to work through, which is very which is actually what happens when you take a true, what I would say, a true psychedelic experience. People talk about them dying, like a rebirth, and I've always kind of been interested in this because I've always played kind of like the person that brought my friends like the psychedelics. Like, oh, I was the one that got the shrooms, I was the one that got the acid, and in my own kind of hodgepodge way, I would bring my friends into like these different things, and I was always curious like what was going on with them. And every time I like talked to them, even during but a little bit more after, I played kind of like, I guess, the therapist role. And all the time their death or whatever they were struggling with, I remember this one time my friend was freaking out, right? And I remember I was like, hey Gabriel, what's going on? Like I could just like sense that something was wrong with him. And then like it's funny because like when you're in there, like you actually like everything is like felt. Like it's like a felt experience. Like he's telling me about like, oh, he's having problems with his mom and he's like this and that. And we're young, you know, like everybody kind of has like this kind of existential thing of them like trying to be their own person and maybe it doesn't gel with their family and all this kind of struggle. And I told him, you know, like that's some serious shit that you're going through, and like I totally understand that. But why are you like, we're in San Diego, and like why are you in LA with your parents when you could be right here with us? And like we're on psychedelics right now. We're like, you're here with like your friends. Like I don't understand why you're there when we could be here. And then like, so I kind of like talked them back into this. But I do like that what you were talking about with the 4-step, like I think this is also what's wrong with like religion. Any of those religious texts don't make any sense to me if they're not like oh, they're talking about like a psychedelic experience. like when you
yeah. We got Buddha. Yeah, you got the Buddha's sat under a bodhi tree and he's lived 40 days and 40 nights off the leaves, and the leaves are narcotic. So yeah, he had visions. I don't doubt it. You know, anyone would if you ate that much. And you know, nervous system, that experience that he talked about. And the first time I ever took LSD, right, I'd come back from university, moved back to street. It's when we were doing those recordings, Meg. You know, the band and Ronan and you guys, it was great fun. But you know, I was a bit of a dead end. I was working in a low level management job, and I'm at a party, and my brother says, "Hey Matt, do you want to try some acid?" And I looked at this little blotter, and I thought, that can't have any effect, can it? So I necked it. Half an hour later, I had what I've later read about. The nearest thing I come to the Nirvana Satori feeling, you know, where you're all one, you're one with everything and nothing at the same time. It's just absolute bliss, and that's actually our true state. If we were able to process those 1.8 trillion hits of information that our nervous system sends our brain, if we were able to process them all at once, you'd have that sensation, and that sensation is all of our true selves. I was having this amazing experience. I was an atheist before this, and I was a happy atheist. I would happily put people down and tell them, you know, I had absolutely no spiritual leanings at all, right? I had this experience, and God knows what's coming out of my mouth, because I came to, and my mate moved the crease in the curtain. And basically I realized I was looking at this crease in the curtain in a really bizarre way that I'd never looked at before. And my God, it just completely, utterly changed my experience of reality within half an hour. You know, and I've had a few of those experiences, and we contain all of these experiences in our nervous system. You know, the information of what our true self, what we identify with as us, is a tiny, tiny, tiny fragment of what we really are. And with psychedelics, they access those parts of our brain. So in the right scene and setting, I think that, you know, they're a very, very healthy thing. They're part of our nature. I mean, mushrooms, Buddha having the bodhi leaves, you know, I mean, you know, you've got the Hindus with their soma, the Vedic texts, it all came out of soma, you know, which is some form of mushroom that the South Americans, everywhere, you know, I mean, Santa Claus, for God's sake. I mean, a guy came to Glastonbury, really big talk, because basically it's from Lapland. The reindeers eat the fly Garrick mushrooms, which are the little packages that are around the Christmas tree. Then the shaman drinks the reindeer's urine, purifies it. He then urinates into all these bottles, goes around in his sled, jumps in through the hole in the roof of the fire is in their roundhouses, and gives them all the magic potions. And then you get the flying reindeers. I mean, I remember my daughter, when she was about 4, saying to me, Daddy, why are fairies always on those red and white mushrooms? I'm like, well, honey, I can't tell you that now, but you're on, you know. And my parents, I can't believe it, my firstborn, my daughter was born, they bought her a giant Disney Fly Garrick mushroom to lie on, right? this sort of thing over the top, with another Fly Garrick mushroom with a reflective thing dangling over it. I'm thinking, man, I'm not passing on the drug references to my kids. My freaking parents are, and Disney. What's going on? you know, I mean, once I got into psychedelics, I turned the television off. You know, I mean, I saw Teletubbies on an acid come down once, man. I do not recommend it. You know, that stuff is horrendous. You know, and you realise, shit, it's called programming. I mean, how about that for paranoia? You know, so,
yeah. I think that, you know, the whole thing with taking acid, this whole thing of having either a good trip or a bad trip, it's all kind of a good thing in my view, because it's all part of the breakdown of that programming that you speak of, Matt. A bad trip is also a breakdown of programming, the same as, you know, which obviously it's not an easy process for somebody to just suddenly, and that's why I think with depression, and me and Dan have often talked about this, the whole kind of dark night of the soul thing, depression that doctors love to suppress.
Yeah.
I don't believe that suppressing depression is necessarily a good thing. I think that it's something that people need to go through. It makes them introspective. It's part of, it's an element of what we've been talking about with the acid trip, with the breakdown of the programming.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what depression is. It's suddenly becoming introspective, looking at yourself in the mirror, which is not always an easy task if you've been completely programmed and closed off, and all of a sudden something happens in your life, some kind of trauma to wake you up a little bit, as opposed to an acid trip. And then all of a sudden you have to look at yourself, scrutinize yourself in a mirror, and it becomes difficult. It's kind of like a complete breakdown of your identity.
Yeah.
Getting down to the nitty gritty of who you really are, you know.
Yeah, because what happens is we learn to identify ourselves with the persona that we develop to survive our childhood. Yeah, so whatever the situation was of our upbringing, we develop, because we want to survive. You develop parts of ourselves to fit in with the culture and, you know, and the family norms which survive. And we learn to identify with that as us, all of us. That's me. I'm Matt Fellows. I'm 45 years old. You know, I grew up in the street. I dress like this. I speak English. I identify with that. And the problem is, and you see it when people get to 40. I mean, you really see it when you get to 40, because like the survival instinct says, yeah, you have to develop this personality and you have to pretend to be it and try and be as successfully be this personality. And people get used to it, and that sort of plugs you into society and allows you to interact because you're observing the social norms, and we think that's us. And when you take a hallucinogenic drug, you burst out of that. What you think is, it almost can feel like you're trapped inside your skull or your skeleton and your flesh envelope, completely separate from everybody else, cast adrift in this horrendous sort of ocean of chaos that hates you. I mean, and that's reinforced by the media, of course, which is basically, I mean, you turn on the TV, if it's not people shooting each other, it's animals eating each other. I mean, it's just constantly more animals eating each other. It's like animal snuff movies constantly. It's like if you step outside your door, it's not humans will kill you, animals will, and then there'll be volcanoes and they'll explode. And, you know, and you feel like you're desperate to try and keep this bit of me alive. And the big fear is, you know, you're going to lose that bit. And I mean, I had a DMT trip once, just once, and then that's enough to last me for lifetimes, you know. But the opening 20 seconds was absolutely terrifying. I've never experienced anything like it, you know, and I was fairly experienced in psychedelics. I'd had some other incredible experiences, but the speed that hits, the first 20 seconds, all I could describe it as is like, you know, all of what I just talked about, the bit that I identified as me, like I've got this bubble, basically, that I call Matt, right? And you know, and I try and make inside this bubble and outside is this hostile environment. Right, and I know that if my bubble pops and that hostile environment comes in, my bubble will cease to exist anymore, and I will cease to exist.
Just out of interest, how old were you when you when you had the DMT experience?
I would have been about 28, 29. I didn't take any psychedelic drugs before 25, and I think.
So, had you taken other psychedelics before the DMT?
Yeah, loads. All sorts.
So what was the difference between the psychedelic, you know, the LSD, the psychedelia you'd experienced before the DMT? What was the difference? Was there a major difference between them?
And the force which comes on, because I mean the actual trip I had in time and space as we know it lasted 7 minutes. If you imagine taking like an 18-hour LSD trip, like really intense one, condense it down to about 7 minutes, and you get some idea maybe of all I can say is there's a wind that exists in the universe or the multiverses, that if our consciousness comes in contact with it, any idea that we're going to be able to maintain our perception of who we are gets disintegrated in the first 15-20 seconds. And for the first 15-20 seconds, it's absolutely terrifying. I felt like my bubble was opening and opening and opening and opening and opening. Oh my god! And it went past the point of no return, and I really thought I was going to die. I was like, "Oh my god, you fucked it, mate!" off that, and it opened up and opened up, and the fear when you hit the fear barrier, when the bubble's really opening and there's no going back, and where fear was, this is about 15 seconds in, where fear was everything, every molecule, every atom was just resonating with just utter fear. It was terrifying. No other reason why I'd never do it again. But then fear is finite. It's quite weird. The fear of death is actually a minor fear, I realized when I came up against that. There's much bigger fears than worrying about whether you die. But fear is finite. And then I went beyond, my consciousness went beyond fear. And fear went from being omnipresent and everywhere and every atom resonating with fear to literally fear as a concept was in this bubble. And it was just floating off into the Pacific Ocean. The chances of me ever finding that bubble ever again would be impossible. And what I realized was, before the idea that I have now, this is always a metaphor. It's like, how do you describe something which is incredibly indescribable, but just so shockingly profound that words fail me? But it's like that, my bubble burst, the big fear. And instead of, the only thing that died was the idea that I could die. Because what happens is you lose the individual identification with this bubble, and you gain the identification and perception of the ocean. And it's like it's the most unbelievably profound experience I've ever had, I have to say.
So you realize that everything is kind of infinite, and that you're not there is no death. There is no death. It's like, what an awesome thing for somebody to realize. But then maybe there's certain people that perhaps aren't ready for that, or then they're not, they need to have this. I think one of the things about this kind of third dimensional reality we exist in is that everything is separate. There's this illusion that we're all separate. And when I try and sort of talk to people that perhaps, haven't taken LSD or don't have a completely open mind, but they're starting on some kind of a journey where they're starting to look at things in a different way, but they still don't kind of get it or understand it. I kind of try and sort of say to them, but the signs are all there in this reality, in that everything that exists is connected in some way. So, and they say, well, what do you mean? And I say, well, if you look inside the intricate detail of a plant or a fruit and then a human body, there's all these connections and similarities. But weirdly, they don't see it. They can't see it. They can't see these, which to me are very obvious connections.
Yeah. Are we back? Hello. Yep. Cool. Sorry. The connection got cut off then. So I think
no, you're still there. So I don't know how much you caught of that, Matt, but I was just saying that everything in the physical world of the third dimensional reality is very obvious, that we're all connected in some way.
Definitely. And you can see, and we all yearn for it. I mean, that's partly why football, music, people like to come together. We're as a biological entity, we're mammals, we're sort of pack animals. We like to be around each other, and because we have a shared experience. I mean, that's what they say, why when someone yawns and it's almost impossible for everyone else in the room not to yawn, it's because we're biologically programmed as mammals that we're seeking a shared experience. And I think that's part, on top of all the wars and everything, what's causing people sort of existential angst, because we have this urge and this deep down feeling that we are all connected, and yet we're trying to live in a world that just constantly affirms that we're separate. And I guess, I mean, that's the control mechanism, divide and rule. It's the oldest trick in the book, and that is definitely being put on us. And that's why things like psychedelics have been, and even marijuana have been made illegal. Part and main reason is because if you're trying to control a population and try and control a population's perception of itself, because let's face it, at the moment, the vast majority of people, and the internet's making a difference, but our entire perception of life, other than our direct experience, comes from television, newspapers, books. It's secondhand. It's not actually direct experience. And if you can control the information that people receive by their perception of reality, you can mold, who they think they are and how they interact with the apparent outside world. And they take psychedelics. Good luck. And I mean, classic example. After one particular party, I was at a festival that we snuck into in the 90s. It used to be a rite of passage, really, sneaking into music festivals. You can't do it anymore. And I've been up all night, and I was surrounded by these security guards suddenly, and I didn't have a wristband. I was trying to eat a bacon roll, which shows how long ago it was. And one guy gets in my face and says, "Excuse me, mate, where's your wristband?" And I'm like munching on this bacon roll, and he's like, so I sort of said to him, well, you know how important this wristband is. It's if I don't have one, I get thrown out. He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Well, I should look after it." And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, do you want to know what I did with it?" And he's like, "What?" So I whispered to him in his ear. I said, "I buried it over there by the sea." And he said, "Well, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." So I said, "Well, okay, I'll go get my tent." So I turned around, walked in the opposite direction, just walked off. He came running after me and said, "Excuse me, I thought you said it was over there by the sea." And I was like, "Oh," sort of turned around and pointed in the opposite direction and walked straight past him. Said, "Oh yeah, over here by the sea." And by that point, they were all in hysterics. They were just laughing so much, because what happened was they tried to play the cops and robber game, shall we say. They're the security guards. I'm the guy who's broken into the festival. They've caught me, so they're in the dominant.
Fear mongering.
Yeah, they're in the dominant role.
Trying the fear mongering again, which it's kind of, it's built into the system of the human, isn't it? It's bred into us, like programmed into us within our lives.
It's not a
this
natural
whole fear mongering thing, and I think the liberation is to overcome that fear. Fear of what people think of you, the fear of embarrassment, the fear of well, people might not like this, people might not like this if I say this. The fear of loss. The fear of loss is another one. It's like, if I say this,
I'm going to be rejected.
I'm going to be rejected, or people might not like me anymore, or they might reject me out of the group. The minute you transcend that, it's like 100% liberation, isn't it?
Yeah. Because you come out of the cage, and it's better to be out of the cage running around in the field outside than being in the cage with everybody else. You liberate yourself from the feeling of cramp, and sitting on each other. Yeah, I mean, a metaphor a friend of mine came up with is just like our conscious waking reality is like our entire society is trapped in an airing cupboard on the 13th floor of this infinite mansion, and we're all in the dark, and everyone's jostling for position to get to be able to read the top of the warning on the boiler by the pilot light. So our whole society's in the dark trying to read it, and all it says is don't sit too close to the boiler. And what we need to do is take a step back, which is what hallucinogenic drugs do, and you fall out of the door, and suddenly you're in this infinite mansion that you can just wander around that is ourselves. And it's more than just what I identify with as Matt, or you guys identify with you. We are, I mean, you get into the realms of, how do you describe something that is impossible to describe, but yet is everything you ever try and describe is trying to describe it? And it's I think that's why art, creativity, theatre, things like that are really, really important, because you can use those methods as well to transcend just being trapped in this one version of ourselves.
If you're an actor or a writer or, like you say, a creator, an artist, you can use that to, like you say, transcend the fear of the normal day-to-day living of like, oh, it's really embarrassing, I can't be myself because people might think I'm weird. But if you're acting and you're playing a character or a part, it becomes a little bit more acceptable, so you can do it. So it is definitely the key to freeing our minds up a little bit and transcending that fear. I would definitely agree with that.
I think it's healthy, you know, because again, the problem with pretty much all the arts, be it music, theatre, you know, we're led to believe that unless you're playing Wembley Stadium, you know, on a sellout tour after selling 25 million records and being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, unless your art is being perceived on a mass scale, it's not valid. And that is, and what strips people, we create, human beings, we create because we need to, it's part of us, inside everybody, you know, and it's not about the important thing is creating. It's irrelevant whether it's any good to a certain extent. It's how it feels to you at the time you're doing it. That is why you should create. This idea that we have to, you know, I mean, we used to get it. Oh yeah, I make music. Oh yeah, I suppose I'll wait to see you on Top of the Pops, you know. And because that's held up as the ideal, that keeps people from being creative. Because I mean, we've all had it, you know, when you're told as a kid to shut up, don't sing, you know, there was definite put down, stay away from that, unless you're Mariah freaking Carey or Whitney Houston, you've got a 9-octave voice, you're not allowed to sing, you know, which is cutting us off from what it is to be human. I mean, we're going through a huge future shock. I mean, never mind the wars. As a biological entity, we're pretty much the same creature that was born 3,000-4,000 years ago. We haven't changed as a biological entity, you know, and yet the world in which we're trying to form a sense of self in is so alien to us as a biological entity. Is it any wonder that we all run around questioning ourselves? And that is why psychedelics can be very, very helpful, because it puts you meet yourself, your true self. And pretty much every combination you could possibly meet it in. And, you know, you got to be careful with it. Again, scene and setting, you know, because you're taking another imprint. You know, I've seen most people I know who've experimented with like all drugs. You go through a honeymoon period where you think, oh, wow, I've broken through the veil and this is how I'm going to live forever, you know, and then you got to try and pay the bills and also function. And you realize quite quickly, I mean, we saw with ecstasy, serotonin depletion day, pill Tuesday, you know, that when it got to the sort of early noughties and people, you know, it used to be people would take one and it would last you 9 hours. And then suddenly they're like Smarties and people are popping 7, 8, 9 a night, just turning gurning, drooling imbeciles. And in the end, I mean, I just started drinking orange juice because it was just horrendous. So, you know, you can, there is a downside. It's, what they found with hallucinogenic drugs is it worked as a part of a therapy. You know what I mean? If you think, I don't think you just find enlightenment by just ingesting psychedelic drugs.
No, and I think that if you, it's like I was saying earlier, if you abuse something, it kind of abuses you. It's like you can use something up to a point, and obviously with psychedelics, it will break down all that kind of the walls of what we consider to be what we've been programmed to believe is normal. It will break all of that down, but you have to be careful with it. You can't just sort of like, you know, people get into an obsession of addiction with things where they just want to do things all the time, and it, you know, it's like anything. If you abuse something, it kind of abuses you back.
Yeah. I mean, with acid, if you take it too much, it stops working.
Yeah, you know? You literally don't feel the same effects. And I think the important part is what I always called the integration part, which I didn't learn until like later. And that's like the real challenge of like whatever insights you come to, like, how do you like integrate that to your person, into your being, and that's like the real like challenge for like, you know, us as individuals and for people. But I was just thinking about this right now, and it kind of goes into this big, huge question, and what you were saying earlier, how, you know, whatever artwork we're doing, whatever stuff that we're doing, whether we realize it or not, we're always trying to explain this thing that goes beyond words, that is happening, you know, like it's crazy, because I view it the same way that when you were talking about artwork, right? When people are saying about becoming into like this it becomes another trap, like psychedelics becomes like another trap, your personality becomes another trap, music or whatever it is, at a certain point you start doing it so you could like be perceived differently by other people, or that you have to live up to like some standard, when the real realization is that no, it's just fun. Like that's just life should be enjoyed and have fun. Like everything else
fun,
is like some distraction from just being and having a good time.
Yeah, we're put here to love. I mean, I know it sounds like a hippie thing, but it's true. I mean, just from the American Army were horrified. They did statistics. They recorded statistics in the island hopping campaign when the Americans were driving the Japanese out of sort of like the Philippines and all the islands back to Japan. They basically collected information and found, to their horror, that 1 in 20 had fired their weapon in any of the big battles. So, and they extrapolated that out, that basically pretty much meant that the same, didn't matter what side, the vast majority of people were not fighting, not even missing on purpose, not even firing their weapons. And they came to this horrifying conclusion to them, that human beings, we are hardwired not to kill, not to maim. We don't like it. We're not supposed to. We are pack animals. We're designed to work together, and love one another, and enjoy and play and create. We're quite magical. And when you take hallucinogenic drugs, you know, you do go for the dark introspective part. That's usually the clearing part, you know. And the biggest fear, I think it's a Nelson Mandela quote, I'll have to paraphrase it, but the biggest fear is not that we're not good enough. It's when you come face to face to the absolute shocking awe of our true selves. I mean, it's talking about the first time I experienced it, talking about embarrassing. Oh my God. It's just like, you know, like shocking what we actually really are. And it seems, to a certain extent, our perception of this reality, which there does, I mean, at least it seems to me, there seems to be a conscious choice to block out 99% of the information and pretend that we are all separate. There does seem to be, for some reason, I mean, whenever I've ever come up on acid, there comes a point where that becomes hilarious. Like there's a major elephant in the room, you know, and the fact that we spend all this time, it's almost like all the stress and all the world politics and everything like that, it's all the distraction. We're, for some reason, deliberately distracting ourselves from the fact that we are all this infinite one unexplainable thing that's everything and nothing. And what we do is, for some reason, we pretend that we're not, that we're separate, and then we try and love in separation. But there seems to be a reason for it, which when I'm tripping and high makes perfect sense. But obviously when I come back down into this reality, it doesn't. But it seems like my perception,
it's almost like a game of that the one true consciousness, or the God consciousness, whatever you want to call it, likes to play for sort of eons. So it goes round and round and round in these cycles of like darkness, where, you know, everything's really awful, but darkness more to the point of being a lack of awareness, and then it goes through cycles of being of light, of being aware, and it's a game that it plays with itself. Of, if I allow myself to go really deep into the darkness, can I find my way back to the light?
Prodigal son.
I think that's basically what it is. I don't think, you know, and the new age kind of propagates this thing of, yeah, you know, you get to this point of like pure enlightenment, and we'll wake up one day and we'll be in this fifth dimensional world. It'll be all wonderful and beautiful. But the reality is, we'll get to that stage, but we'll go up and up and up, and that is an illusion of the third dimension. The whole thing of, I think it's more of an expansion of consciousness, rather than going up.
Yeah, we're not going up and down.
We're not going anywhere, and and we will continue to play this game, and there is no death, there is no end. It's not. We're not going to reach like, oh, we're going to reach the 20th dimension and then that's the end. It's like, no. If you reach that, you're going to go back down the levels again, because you're going to want to play the game all over again.
Yeah. I mean, I had it on the DMT thing. I mean, once I went through the fear barrier, I remember it was a bit like Hellraiser. I hit the fear barrier, and it was this voice went, "I know the thing you fear the most," and his face came bursting out of this paper mache sun that I was looking at. It was like Hellraiser, but I realised it was the face of my former boss, who had accidentally made cry. I didn't mean to make him cry. I think I was just the last straw that led him to have a breakdown, take a day off for the first time in 3 years. Anyway, I thought at that point, that's when I went through the fear barrier. I thought, well, I'm not scared of him. And then I manifested my father's face, and then this huge tunnel of light, the archetypal tunnel of light, opened up, and I just went back to the source, or whatever you want to describe it, of an experience of non-being, infinite non-being. Apparently, it was probably about 25 seconds in three-dimensional time and space, and then coming back down, my consciousness back down into myself. But I'm quite mindful that, you know, when you try and describe psychedelic experiences to people, it's really difficult to describe something that's like an infinite dimensional experience in three-dimensional words and terms and symbols. It's I find Leary's, the idea that the 8 circuits of the brain, and when different ones switch on, our perceptions of reality radically alter. And that's why you have Robert Anton Wilson talks about tunnel realities. How, especially as males, as we get older, you know, when you're younger, you're open to new ideas, and especially when you sort of adolescence, different tunnel realities open up. You're a goth, you're a metaler, you're a skater, you're this, and then you get older, and as we get older, particularly as men, we narrow down to just one tunnel reality, and that's what we believe reality is. And the way our minds seem to be programmed is whatever the thinker thinks, the prover will prove sooner or later to them. That's why people have self-fulfilling prophecies. And yeah, I mean, that's why psychedelics are so good, because you get tunnel realities that you would never ever have even thought about, given the sort of knowledge of ourselves that we're given by sort of modern Western upbringings.
I think it's kind of safe to say that the use of psychedelics definitely breaks down all the barriers, and it kind of alerts you to the fact that everything is infinite, everything is connected. And like you say, Matt, which I totally agree with, it's very difficult to describe that experience in 3D, three-dimensional terms to somebody that it's almost like trying to describe something to an alien that doesn't understand. It's like you're an alien from another planet, and you're trying to describe that to somebody that couldn't possibly conceive of it.
No.
But I have to say, we're coming up to the end now anyway. So we've kind of gone over a little bit deliberately on my view, on my terms, because I felt like we were having a good discussion. But do you have any kind of sort of final thoughts, Matt, on what we've discussed? Or do you, in terms of people, the collective of people in general and humanity, and a way forward, through this kind of illusion that we are, that most people exist in, this sort of illusory reality?
Well, I mean, this is the great sort of question of the age, isn't it? How do we, the majority, alter our situation so we live in a reality is at least a lot more benign and beneficial to us? And part of it is recognizing to a certain extent that, usually going along with the status quo involves survival. We got to keep a roof over your head. You've got to have money. You've got to be able to eat, and that's all true. So you don't want to rock the boat, go to work. But unfortunately, we live in a system that, for the most part, you have the elite who, and it's not a conspiracy theory, it's even on the news, the 1% who suck through the creation of money, suck the life force. We end up doing things because somebody said, Robert Anton Wilson said, that money has replaced the family and the tribe as the means of survival. Back in, before, in tribal societies, you relied on your family members and the people around you to survive. And that was really, really important. So those relationships were incredibly important and close. But now, because money is the means of survival, you have to go to work with people who you normally wouldn't choose to associate with necessarily, unless you're really lucky. I'm lucky in the job that I work with. I work with really lovely people. But, when people, you find that you spend most of your life with people that you wouldn't choose to necessarily be with, at the expense of people that you would, because the money the need to achieve biological survival tickets forces us to do unnatural things. So somehow you can't have a revolution because it's in a word, it just goes round and round in a circle, and it can't be violent, but somehow, and I think it's coming, just seeing people in the military and things like that, realizing that, look, it's starting to cross over now. If we remain passive, we'll end up getting sacrificed in the equivalent of the fields of Flanders, and it will be more of a survival threat to go along with this than it is to actually try and do something about it. We're very close. I know we've got all the technology, we've got all the knowledge. If we didn't have a system that is designed on war and benefiting from war and military conquest, and a small group of people govern the vast majority of people, who they deliberately dumb down in a multitude of different ways, from the media to legal drugs, like you were saying earlier about antidepressants, and how they just cut people off from their emotions. We're being oppressed, and somehow, as a species, we have to overcome that. As to how, you have to be suspicious of movements. I think it's just a consciousness that's growing and growing, and over generations, if we can avoid major wars, being the wonderful adapting creatures that we are, humans will, we will get past that. And the genie's out of the bottle with psychedelics. It is, and they're having to announce it more. And I think you're seeing it with marijuana and things like that. The fact that it's illegal, still, the police don't want to. People are like, really, God's sake. So I see a lot of hope. It's not something that's going on.
I think as well, as much as I kind of have a bit of a love-hate relationship with technology, in the sense that it's yet another platform to promote more shite. But at the same time, it's very connective. It enlightens people in many ways as well. So there's that element, which I think, that's a kind of a new world that we live in now, in the sense that we can all be aware of each other and have to, like we are doing now. We're having this discussion.
Have to write letters to each other back in the 80s, wouldn't they? I send you a postcard.
I think we should bring that out again. The whole letter writing, make it fashionable again. Because there's something really nice about writing a letter on a paper and sending it to people. I kind of thought to myself the other day as well that, if things get really bad on the internet and, communication and stuff, will we start using, we can start using carrier pigeons.
I like it. Yeah,
in Blackadder, just send carrier pigeon messages to everybody. And then that way the internet, they can't track us, they can't look at what we're doing, etc. Dan, do you have any kind of final thoughts on what we've discussed tonight? Hundreds.
I'm totally down to bring back paper. Actually, I have this
and carrier pigeons.
This book that I'm working on and off, and it's called The Paper Bums, and basically it's in the near dystopian future where everything's being tracked by the internet, which is basically happening right now. But the main character, to keep his sanity and to keep his own thoughts, he writes on paper, and and he does like this ritual where he writes, and it's called the Paper Bums, and it's this whole thing. But it's so interesting how, because this whole dichotomy of like what is inundated on us with the media and everything, like Matt was saying and what you were saying, like I feel it. And I remember just recently I went on a trip with my dad, and we were talking about Donald Trump and all sorts of bullshit, and I'm just like, I get sucked into the drama too. Like it's kind of funny. I just like making these jokes, and then my dad getting kind of like upset, and then like we just have like this whole like thing going back and forth. Where I'm like, oh yeah, this is gonna happen, and that's gonna happen, and I just start going crazy with it. But I just always start laughing of like how silly everything is, and how So there's one part where like the world is like gonna end and is full of shit, and like everything's bad and everything's crazy. But then like I'm out on this trip, and I'm like out in nature, and then like we're at like this national park, and then like everybody is kind of different than me, but we're really like nice to each other, like like, hey, what's up, oh, how's it going, like, oh, I'm sorry, like, did you need to go to like get water, like people just want to be friendly with each other. And like I ended up having a random conversation with just some guy on this bus, and he was like totally different than me. I think he lived in Arizona, but we just started like having a nice conversation because we were bored and like there's nothing else to do, and like why be mad when like the sun's shining and like birds are chirping, and like it was just so like it's like so weird how we get ourselves like in this mind space, in this one way of how things are because of what they're saying on the news or what this person's saying, or even like even if it's not media, like I know how it used to be when I would like have a fight with my girlfriend and then like everything sucked, like I was stubbed my toe that day and I would be like pissed that day, but then like for some reason, like if I was in a good mood, like everything goes right, like I catch my bus on time, I like someone gives me like $5 for no reason, and like everything's good. And it's so crazy how everything could just change like that, and I think that's like that double-edged sword of how fluid really this whole construct of society really is. And that's why there's probably such a fury on top of keeping us in these roles and playing these games, because like really I think we all should just like wake up tomorrow and be like, you know what, like everything's all right, everything's cool, we don't need to like protest all this stuff, we just need to stop doing stupid shit and just have fun.
And let's face it, Donald Trump is hysterical. I mean, for me, Donald Trump is just the ultimate puppet of distraction. He is. He's the ultimate.
He's the most ridiculous person of all time. Like, I mean, if you look at Donald Trump and you don't realize like how goofy society is, like it's like it's not even like a TV show anymore. It's just I just look at him and I'm like, oh my god, is this guy for real?
I think it was Frank Zappa said it, and I quote it in the play The Return of Sovereignty. Politics is a puppet show for the military-industrial complex. It's wrestling. It's, I mean, they just got this guy to scare everybody and just basically get everybody divided again. Divide and rule. I mean, and whatever puppet they put in. I mean, my grandfather was an African-American GI, so with Obama, I wanted so desperately to believe in it, but I just saw it for the cynical exercise it was. You got the end of the Bush regime, the anti-war movement in America is so strong that, they were getting like 100,000 people in Cincinnati, in Ohio, protesting. And then they brought Obama in overnight, and I really wanted to believe in it, but it just took that away. And then you get 8 years of sort of like, okay, we're going to try and be nice, and we're a lot nicer, and we've moved on. And then it's sort of like shock and awe. So you soften everybody back up again, so everyone's happy. And then you hit them with Donald, which is literally, talk about breaking down personalities and programming. What it is to be American is being destroyed by his behavior. the idea that the president, I mean, it's still an idea in a lot of people's idea that the president of the United States is actually a rational human being, and Donald just I mean, George Bush Jr. really put an end to that one. I mean, I think Reagan was pushing it a bit as well. But, I mean, Donald, it literally is like, that's all, folks.
That's all, folks.
The ultimate clown, isn't he? He is the ultimate. And it's just like people are and what I find hilarious is that all the celebrities, the A-list celebrities are on board with it now. That if that's not a sign that he's the ultimate distraction, I don't know what is.
I mean, I had it with Obama. I wanted to believe in Obama, but then I found out that Obama was half Irish. Well, I'm not dissing being half Irish, right? That's fine, but so he's not fully African American, right? So if he'd have just said, "Look, I am the first mixed race president," fucking bingo, man! Mixed race president. What a great idea! Isn't that amazing? I'm half white, I'm half black. We've just bridged the gap. Yeah, amazing in terms of unity. But they didn't do that. They pushed he's the African American, he's African American, he's African American, and they, and that sort of caused this, this sort of thing, and then they bring in Trump. I mean, so whoever's the president, whoever's the prime minister, they're a puppet. And whilst we're booing and hissing them and getting involved in the Punch and Judy game, the real culprits are carrying on mission normal and carrying on what they're doing. Which, I mean, to labour the point, my thing about Brexit was,
while we're watching the kind of the circus,
the real agenda,
isn't it?
Never. They don't tell us. We're the peasants. You don't tell the peasants what we're going to do. Good Lord. And you certainly don't. We live in England, definitely. It's a feudal. It's not changed since the Middle Ages. It really hasn't. Okay, we've got cards and mobile phones.
No, it hasn't.
We're peasants, okay? We work for a living. And there's not many people get on the ark. I mean, people up in the pyramid, higher up, are starting to realise, I think, hold on, I'm not on the ark. My kid's on the ark. When the grand plan kicks in, I'm going to get sacrificed with all the people that I'm...
I was thinking, actually, in terms of the World Cup, if England won the World Cup, that would be kind of the ultimate distraction, wouldn't it? For them to get on with their business as usual. It would be like the best possible distraction.
Well, I don't...
to man.
Yeah, I mean, we'd be stunned, wouldn't we? I mean, what would we do? Talk about it caused a complete collapse of our national psyche if we wait.
28 days later, that's what it'd be like.
People just stumbled around, looted off licenses, with the odd shopping trolley turned over, and we come down from this terrible dream that we're no longer heroic losers anymore. We've just won. We would lose our entire national identity, and the bit about us that we know is good and righteous is the fact that we don't win. Yeah. We don't. We heroically lose. And then the world loves us for that. They love England. Plucky, heroic losers. That's what we want to be. They don't go around genocidally wiping out people's countries and stealing their resources. They come up with self-depreciating humour. So yeah,
Matt, yes. Wrap it up. Do you have any upcoming productions that you want to alert us to before we go off the air?
Yeah, July the 26th at the Glastonbury Assembly Rooms. It's called Unity and the Return of Sovereignty. It's a play that encompasses pretty much everything we've talked about, really. It's a good hour and 20 minutes, and it packs quite a hefty punch. So if anyone's in the Glastonbury area, that's Unity and the Return of Sovereignty, July the 26th, a Thursday, Glastonbury Assembly Rooms. Doors open at 7. We're on at 8. Thank you very much.
Well, I will do my best to make that. And
bless you.
I might have Dave Beach on the show next time.
Oh, excellent. Oh, a local legend. Definitely.
Dan, do you have any final words before we go off the air?
No, actually, no. I'm all good.
Okay, guys. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
And Dan, I will do my best to make that. And as always, it's been a great show. I think that it would be good to have you on again sometime.
I'd be happy to.
You'd be happy to come on and share your words of wisdom and your views.
Absolutely.
I'd certainly be more than happy to have you. So, and anyway, hopefully, if you want to join in with the Dave Beach show, you're more than welcome, because the way we do things here is just, everybody's welcome. If we have somebody on the show, anybody can, rock up and enjoy it and add their penny. So anyway, guys,
thanks a lot.
Lovely talking to you both.